Hello, everybody. Nice to see everybody. I'm going to jump right in because I have a lot of things I'm hoping to cover with you all and leave time at the end for questions. So let me share my screen with you all. So what we're talking about today is how any of you can ace the recruiter interview and the hiring manager interview. As you probably know, first two steps in an interview process typically. Um, what I will say is that I want to caveat this entire conversation and talk by acknowledging that the job market is totally brutal right now. It's really abnormal the way things are working. So I will say what I'm going to share are what I would consider best practices for most of the time. Some of these things you may say, you know what, I don't have time or energy for this right now, and that's okay. But I'm hoping to give you all of the tools, that I am aware of to help you to get through these first couple stages in the interview process. Again, acknowledging that it is not an easy job market. And a lot of what's going on out there is not about you. It's about the companies not doing the right things. So there was a question that someone submitted sort of ahead of this conversation. And the specific question was, what is the short-term future of hiring in tech? And I wish I could give you an answer of what it is, what it's going to look like. Because we know, recruiting, hiring, the economy has its sort of booms and busts, right? It's valleys and peaks. We're definitely in a valley right now. I know a lot of people are feeling it. There's a lot of people saying in the next 12 months, it's going to sort of go back to where it was in high growth mode. But I think I would be a millionaire by now if I could predict what the market was going to do. But let's all put our collective energy to hope and, just give as much positivity as we can to influence the market back to sort of hiring normally again. That's the hope anyways. But this is me. Akiana just did such a wonderful job introducing me that I won't spend too much time here. I currently head up talent acquisition at Iterative Health. Talent acquisition is the same thing as recruiting. So if you haven't heard that term, it's a recruiting team. The one thing that I do want to point out is that you should keep in mind as you're thinking about your search is that there are internal recruiters and there are external recruiters. A lot of what I'm going to tell you here are tips and tricks for internal recruiters. External recruiters operate a little bit differently, and they make their money off of getting you hired into roles. So they are an advocate for you in some cases, but they don't always work exactly the way you want them to work. And they oftentimes are partnered with an internal recruiter. Most of my experience is internal recruiting for a specific company, but I did start an agency way back when. So, part of why I would say, hopefully you're here to listen to me is that I've recruited on pretty much every role you can think of, across industries, across sizes of companies. I've seen really good hiring processes. I've seen really bad hiring processes, really good recruiters, bad recruiters. So hopefully what I'm going to share with you today is going to help you navigate what that looks like. And so acing the recruiter screen, that's probably why you're here. Typically what's going to get you here, so before we even talk about what this conversation entails, what is going to get you to a recruiter screen is usually that you've applied for a role, or gotten a referral for a role. So your resume is something that got you to this point. Your resume showcasing your skills. Maybe it's a cover letter that talks about why you're interested in this role, interested in this company. It may be some application questions that the company has as part of the process that, you just really nailed how you answered those questions. What exactly on your resume or your cover letter or in those questions that gets you to this point is going to vary based on the role, based on the recruiter, based on the hiring manager. Not everybody's looking for the same thing, which is probably why you've gotten the advice that you want to have multiple versions of your resume or cater the cover letter to the company. But even still, in the same company, people have different feelings and thoughts and biases on what shows up in your resume, in your cover letter, in your answers to questions that might be there. So I say this to call your attention to the fact that in a lot of cases, once you're sort of in, if you will, you've made it to this recruiter screen, a lot of the things that got you here are, they cease to be, I don't want to say useful, but they cease to be meaningful in the sense that, hey, great, you had all the skills, hiring managers looked at your resume. They're really excited to talk to you. In most cases, they're excited to talk to you based on the recruiter screen that you had. Not so much on your resume or on your application questions. Those are sort of, they're there, but they're in the past. So your resume may have gotten you to this point. Your resume is not really what's taking you to the next step. It's this conversation that you're going to have. So the recruiter is going to likely do all 4 of these in the first conversation that you have with them, usually in this order, but not always. And it's really about passing the minimum requirements for the role, or what they understand them to be. Your goal in this conversation is not only to showcase your skills, because that's a big piece of it, as I said, but you do also want the recruiter to like you. And I know that that's kind of like an icky thing to say, because, you know, do I have the skills or I do not have the skills? Why do I have to be your best friend? But the reality is we're all humans, and the recruiter is going to be your advocate through the process. They are the one that has to go to bat for you in some cases. If maybe you're not a perfect fit, or maybe you get to the end of the process and the offer isn't what you want it to be, the recruiter is your advocate. They're the one that is going to help you get through the process. And so as much as you can do in the initial conversation and subsequent conversations to get them to you know, to want to help you. So this is like being your authentic self, and not trying to hide behind, you know, some correct version of yourself, or, you know, just trying to make a human connection with them. So I would say that, yes, this conversation is about your skills. It's also about sort of enabling a really good relationship with the person who's going to be your main point of contact through the process. So at a high level, this conversation, we're going to go into each of these, so don't think this is the only time we're touching on this. You have your introductions, you know, as part of the beginning of the conversation. They have a bunch of questions for you, of course. You're going to tell your story as part of that. There's sort of the HR details, if you will, the very tactical things they need to make sure they understand about you. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions in most cases as well. When you're preparing for this conversation, you want to make sure you've done your research on the company. You don't have to spend like 2 hours doing this, but you should know some really easy to find things about the company, what they do, you know, what the culture is like based on what their career page says, those sorts of things. You're going to want to review the job description again going into this conversation. So you probably read it or skimmed it. If it's really long, which they are often, you're going to want to review the job description before you go into this conversation, so you are remembering what it is you're supposed to be talking about. And then finally, look at the recruiter's background on LinkedIn, because you want to know who you're talking to. Part of that is maybe there's a way for you to build human connection that way. Another thing, though, is it makes you feel just a little bit less nervous when you know who you're talking to, and you've like seen their picture, and you know where they went to school, you know what companies they've worked for. It just helps, at least it helps me, and it helps a lot of people, I think, feel more comfortable going into the conversation, because it's not just a name and an email anymore. This person is a human. Akiana, I see you raised your hand. Do I have to call on you?
No, I didn't want to
Okay.
cut you off when you were saying something important. It looks like you're speaking to us from some slides, but I don't see them shared. So do you want to just share your
Uh-oh,
screen?
because they are shared. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, everybody. As Akiana was saying, tech is gonna tech, right?
Tech on tech.
1 sec. All right, how about now?
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay,
And we'll make
sorry.
sure to get the slides from Alex so that you all can catch up on the couple slides that you missed.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
You only missed my picture, so there wasn't a lot there. So moving ahead to start diving into some of these specific parts of the interview process. The introduction is really the quickest part of the conversation. You know, it's the small talk, it's talking about the weather, it's getting to know you a little bit. And also if the recruiter, I was going to say, if it's a good recruiter, that's not necessarily true. But if the recruiter is in the habit of setting expectations, they may tell you exactly what's going to happen. Hey, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You don't always get that level of detail, but sometimes this is where they're going to set expectations for you about how the conversation is going to go. It's the shortest part of the conversation, absolutely. And what the recruiter's looking for in this case, in this conversation is that you are displaying some level of excitement to be on the conversation, about the company, about the role. If you can sort of go a level deeper than to say like, I'm really excited about AI. You might say like, I'm really excited about AI because I can see this future application with X, right? So it's just going slightly half a step deeper to tell them why you're excited or why you're interested. That's a differentiator for sure. Another thing that the recruiter is going to be looking for and you want to sort of focus on is making sure that, again, you've done your research and they can see that you've done your research. So you don't need to go, write an essay about the company at this stage, but they can tell, hey, this person knows that they're talking to a recruiter. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a conversation with someone and they assume I'm the hiring manager. So you know your audience, you have a baseline understanding of the role and of the company. Those are things that the recruiter is looking for at this stage and throughout the conversation. What you don't want to do as you're like introducing yourself, sometimes they will just ask you to introduce yourself, but in this intro, is you want to make sure that you don't give too much personal information. So yes, you want to be human. Yes, you want to build a connection. Yes, you want to be your authentic self. But there's a lot of information that is not relevant to the job at all and is actually protected information that you wouldn't necessarily want to share with the recruiter. So things like religion or family or marital status, your age, there's a lot of things that you don't want to give the recruiter as something to potentially bias them. We're all human. We all have biases. We try not to as recruiters, but we can't mitigate all our biases. So minimizing, too much personal information is important, but also setting yourself up so that you are a human to them. You're not just another applicant. So it's a fine line. It's definitely a balance, but sort of think about what that might look like for you. So then we're going to jump into sort of the main part of the interview, where they're going to be asking questions of you. In this part of the interview, the recruiter is going to be trying to understand, does this person have the core skills, right? I have a list of skills. They may be the ones directly on the job description. Maybe there's some unwritten things, which I know is really annoying. Sometimes it happens. But they have a list of things that they are trying to check off to make sure they can submit you to the hiring manager, essentially. You have all the right things. So this is part of why you should review that job description ahead of the conversation, so you know exactly which things they're going to be looking for, and then you can cater what you're talking about, your examples, your experience that you share to the things that this job requires. The recruiter is also going to be trying to understand if you are aligned to the company culture, to the company values. Usually those are on the career page, so you can do a little pre-reading there as well to understand the sorts of things that are important to the company. And so they'll be looking for signal and behaviors that perhaps you have talked about and examples you've given that would suggest that you are or are not aligned to those things with the company. So how the recruiter is going to get this information from you, two ways, or maybe a combination of the two, but they may ask really specific questions. Sometimes they're working off a script, or it feels like they're working off a script, and they need to get really specific answers to very specific questions. So that might look like, how much experience do you have with Salesforce? Do you have experience with X? Do you have experience with Y? How much experience? How many years? So sometimes it's going to feel a little bit more robotic. And in other cases, it's going to be really open-ended. And I know I saw some questions that came in about this, which is, how do you answer, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your most recent role? Very open-ended. You don't really know what they're looking for. You have some clues from the job description, but they're not telling you what they'd like to know more about. And so you may have either of these, or you may have a combination. Sometimes it starts open-ended and then it gets really specific as the conversation goes on. Other things to consider, we'll talk about how to answer these on the next slide, but other things to consider that the recruiter is paying attention to in this part of the conversation is this person listening and following directions? And that sounds really strange, I know, but if the recruiter says, spend 3 minutes telling me about your most recent role. Don't start telling them about, you got your degree at this place and then 15 years ago you did X or Y thing. unless you can do that in 3 minutes, which is really hard to do. 3 minutes is a short period of time. So if they give you a specific directive or a specific amount of time, or they ask you to do something in a certain amount of sentences or to focus in a certain place and you don't, they're going to understand that you maybe don't have good listening skills, for example. So they are paying attention to cues like that. They're also going to be paying attention to how you communicate, which probably doesn't surprise you. You know, are you communicating clearly and concisely? Are you interrupting them, perhaps? You know, they start asking a question and you interrupt and ask your own question. All of these are things that they're going to be paying attention to, in addition to the actual answers that you're giving in the conversation. So things to keep in mind as you're communicating with them, as you're, you know, starting to answer questions. I will tell you, and I know it's going to seem crazy, but following directions and answering the question that has been asked of you is a differentiator. It sounds totally unbelievable. I understand that, but you would be shocked at the amount of people that I ask a certain question and they answer a different one because they have an answer prepared for the other one. So they just decide to answer another question. So you'll set yourself apart if you answer the questions being asked. And if you don't have an answer ready, it's always okay to say, let me just like take a minute and think about that. That is a perfectly acceptable answer. Lets you collect your thoughts, give it a little bit of, you know, thinking time to be able to actually give them the answer that they're looking for versus the one that you have prepared and ready to go. So when it comes to actually telling your story and providing the answers, so as I said, you're probably going to get one of two kinds of recruiting conversations. Maybe it's both. But if you do get these really specific questions, you want to answer those with the STAR method, which is you're starting to answer with the situation that was happening, the task you were assigned, the action you took, the result. And again, I think this is one of those things that people are like, well, of course, that's how you answer a question. People don't do this. So I'm hoping that I can influence you to do this when you are answering questions. The other thing you want to do is you want to show your skills versus tell people about your skills. And what I mean by that is, instead of saying, oh, I'm a really collaborative team player, when they ask you a question about a time that you had to collaborate, not just saying, oh, I'm super collaborative and I get feedback all the time that I'm collaborative, you're going to want to say, okay, let me give you a specific example. There was a time where X happened, and so I did this thing. This was the result, and follow this sort of framework to answer the question. So instead of telling them that you're collaborative, you're showing them that you're collaborative through the behaviors that you have sort of exhibited in a specific situation. Make sure that you're giving a relevant example too. I know this, again, it sounds like these are one-on-one type things. People oftentimes don't do this. And make sure that if you don't have a relevant example, just say that. Say, hey, I don't have an example about this, but you know, I can share something along these lines over here. Instead. And they might say, you know what, no thanks, we'll move to the next question. Or they may say, sure, share that example, please. So you can always ask the recruiter what they'd like if you don't have the direct experience they're asking about. The other thing that I would coach you to do here in the specific questions that you start to get from the recruiter is not avoid questions about challenges or conflicts or mistakes. Anytime someone tells me that they have never encountered a conflict in the workplace or never made a mistake in a role, it's really hard to believe. Maybe this person is just that perfect, but we have all encountered, you know, and they might not be huge mistakes or huge conflicts, but we've all had them. And so being able to tell a story about that and talk about the positive outcome of what happened is very important, and will definitely differentiate you, because there's lots of people that like to dodge those questions. And so the open-ended questions, we're going to go into this a bit more because you do want to have a pitch ready. So the next slide is going to cover your pitch. And if it's a really open-ended question and you're not sure where to go, just ask the recruiter what they're hoping that you will cover. You know, you could say, you know, I have lots of experience that I'd love to share with you. Which are the two most important skills for this role, or the two most important competencies, so I can focus in that area? And then you can cater your story or cater your answer if they're asking about a specific job or things like that. So you can always ask a clarifying question. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So in these types of conversations, or perhaps it's the same conversation, you want to make sure in both cases you're leaving space for follow-up questions, for the recruiter to redirect you if you're going in the wrong direction, answering, in a way that's not helpful for them. You want to make sure that you're not rambling, you're not just talking to fill space, because they can then help you, right? If you pause, take a moment to breathe, it'll let them interject, ask a deeper question, or redirect you if they need to. And that helps them get all the information that they want. If you just talk for 15 minutes straight, they have no opportunity to redirect you unless they interrupt, which sometimes they will. But it's just, from a conversational standpoint, it's what you want to do. You want to create space. You want to let it be a conversation versus you just talking at the person for the duration of the conversation. So you can always start high level when you do something like this. So you might, your pitch is going to be high level. And then you can say, what things should I go into more detail on? So it lets you, again, sort of invite them into the conversation and let them direct you to the things that matter most, at least from their perspective. When you're answering questions, two other things that I'll mention is make sure that the examples you give are as recent as possible. As we all know, things change, technology changes, the way workplaces operate change. All of these things are different than they were 10 years ago. So if the only experience you have, the only way you can answer the question is 10 years ago, that's okay. But if you have 20 examples, use the one that happened last week. You're going to be able to recall the details more easily, of course. And it's going to show the recruiter that you are continuing to have this experience, continuing to build this competency and build this skill. And the last thing I'll say is you want to make sure you're selling your experience. I know, again, it sounds like 101 type of stuff, but it's not. Make sure you are owning your experience. You know what you did. And so talk about it with as much confidence as you can bring yourself to do. You don't want to say, I accomplished X, Y, and Z, but I had a team of people that worked with me. Well, we're not really talking about the team right now. And you can mention that there was a team involved, but you don't want to undercut yourself by talking about how, well, I had all this help from this other person. You really want to own what you've done and sell what you've done, as you're sort of thinking through your examples and telling your story. Okay. Building your pitch. So this is something that you will use with the recruiter. You'll use it with the hiring manager, and you will use it in probably most of the other interviews you have. It's going to be tweaked every time, but you really want to invest time on making sure you have a really good pitch that does a great job of telling who you are, what skills you have, what relevant skills you have, and why you're awesome. So, I want to make sure you understand that the why you're awesome part is also really important. Yes, of course, relevant skills are important. We're talking about jobs here. But the why you're awesome piece is very much a differentiator. So when I say who you are, right, that is your name, your job title, and maybe something that is uniquely you. Your pronouns actually should also probably be in here, assuming you're comfortable sharing them in an interview setting. So this is perhaps the easiest part. Relevant skills, you want to sort of zoom out here and you want to tie it to results. So, instead of saying like, I'm an engineer and I write code, no, you are an engineer who solves customer problems. Instead of saying I'm a marketer who generates leads, no, you're not. You're a marketer who increases company revenue through XYZ. You don't want to say, I'm an EA who provides administrative support. Nope, you're not. You're an EA and you increase leverage for the executive team. So you want to zoom out and think really big picture about the work that you do every day and think about the impact of that work. That is what you want to underline and highlight in terms of your relevant skills. And then from an awesomeness standpoint, bring in something that can differentiate you. So this might be something that is unique to you that you do in your free time. It might be a side gig you have. It might be how, something in your life ties to the mission or the values or the vision of the company that you're talking to. Again, I'm going to caution you against sharing too much personal information. You want to be human, but you don't want to give people reasons to be biased or give people reasons to screen you out because they assume something about you. But this is the awesomeness piece is really like a really big bucket. I guess I'll say you could bring in other results that you've been able to drive, other skills that you have that maybe are useful in the role. If there's context on why you're changing careers or you're framing non-traditional experience, you frame all of that as awesomeness, right? You know, I started my career in X and I'm bringing ABC skills to the role at this company. So you want to, in this space, if you are, you have non-traditional experience, if you're a career changer, you want to address those things head on. You don't want to make the recruiter or the hiring manager ask you, hey, why did you decide to? So it should be part of your pitch. You could even say like, hey, you might be curious why I'm doing this career pivot, or I am going from this industry to that industry. You want to reframe it and you want to build the story yourself. You don't want to let people assume things about you or assume why you're making a particular change. You want to control the narrative. And so addressing that, if that is relevant to you, should be part of your pitch. So what this looks like sort of in practice, at least for me, right? I would tell you that I'm a TA professional. I specialize in scaling companies from hundreds of people to thousands of people. I do this by creating blah, blah, blah. And in my free time, I'm a gardener. And, you sort of actually heard some of my bio, which is part of my pitch when I am looking for a new job. So instead of saying I hire people, because that is what I do, I'm going to zoom way out and say, okay, here are the results I've been able to drive, and here's what I can do at a high level for you, company, organization, recruiter, hiring manager. So that's how you want to think about building your pitch and starting to sort of tell your story in each of these conversations. Because again, you'll use this again and again and again, and you want it to be practiced. You want it to be really well rehearsed, honestly. It should just flow very easily for you. It shouldn't be something you trip over. It should be very well practiced. So spend the time here, figure out what this should be for you. And again, it should be short. It should be a great jumping off point for the rest of the conversation. People should ask you questions based on what you've told them. So we are going to move on. I'm trying to make sure we're staying on time, and we are close. So HR details is also part of the conversation. As I said, usually it's towards the tail end. These are kinds of things like, can you actually commute here? In this wonderful hybrid weird world we're in, it might be, hey, we're in the office this day and this day. Does that work for you? It's also your work authorization. So do you need visa sponsorship? Some companies can support that and some may not be able to. So they'll find that out at this point. They're going to also be trying to understand where you are in your search and what you're looking for at a high level, why you're interested in this role. So those are things that they care about because, if you are at the tail end of your search and they're really excited about you, they need to speed things up. If you're at the beginning of your search and, they're at the end and making decisions, they want to make sure to the best of their ability, they can match where the candidate is in process with the process that they're trying to run. So that will inform them of that. And then salary. I know this is a really tough subject usually, but what I would coach you to do is when they ask what your expectations are, I would coach you to flip it around on them and ask for their range. So they should be asking you about expectations. They should not be asking you about your current compensation. In a lot of states, that is illegal, just so you know. In Massachusetts, that's illegal. So they should be asking you what your expectations are. And you don't want to throw out a range that is lower than what the company is going to offer you, because then they will probably offer you in the range that you cited versus the range that they perhaps have that might be $10,000 or $15,000 higher. So if they ask you what your expectations are, you could say, hey, that's a really great question. I'm still doing my research. Would you be able to share what the budget is for this role? Turn it right back around. In most cases, I will say it works. It doesn't work in every case because some recruiters need to get numbers for, certain companies are very strict about what information the candidate needs to share with the recruiter before the recruiter will move them forward. So sometimes they will push back on you pushing back, but you can sort of keep flipping it around on them as many times as you feel comfortable. But I would counsel you to flip it around on them, or say, I'm looking for, a salary or compensation package that is fair and equitable, or is, market standard, or there's a lot of ways to try to get around this. You don't cite a number, which then puts you sort of on the back foot when you do go to negotiate. So I know this is a tough one, but I'm going to keep moving forward so that we don't miss anything at the end. And if there's anyone that has additional questions about salary and this whole conversation, we can hopefully cover those at the end. So the last part of the recruiter conversation is going to be, hopefully, they're going to leave questions or time for you to ask questions of them. And so you always want to have questions prepared. It's going to show that you're interested. It's going to show that you're engaged in the opportunity. The more unique the questions are that you can think of, the better the answers you're going to get, which is to say, recruiters have prepared answers for a lot of things because they talk to people all day. And so they have answers that they've prepared, that they've curated, that are, perhaps they don't tell the whole truth. Sometimes that's the case. So to get the best answers and to get the most authentic answers, you want your questions to be different or unique in some way. I had a candidate, for example, ask me if I had to describe the culture of the company with I think it was a TV show or a movie, what TV show or movie would the company be? And that's it's a really great way to get the recruiter out of their normal spiel, because I don't have an answer ready for that. I had to really think about that. And the answer they got from me was probably a lot better than what they would have gotten had they said, like, can you tell me about the culture at the company? So think about ways to ask for information that you want in a way that's unique, so that the recruiter in that moment has to answer you versus giving you whatever they've come up with as their answer to that question. Asking hard questions is okay too. I know some people, it makes them a little nervous to ask really hard questions. You may not get it answered. They may say, like, hey, you should ask the hiring manager about that. But it does help you understand how the company deals with hard questions. If you're asking a really tough question, it's a tough question because you reviewed something on Glassdoor that said the company is X or Y or Z. How that person takes your question is going to tell you a lot about how the company interacts, how they communicate with each other, how they work through things that are difficult or challenging. So it's okay to sort of ask hard questions and potentially scare away an employer. I think that's okay, because if you're going to get yourself into a place where, your thing is to ask hard questions, it's to push the envelope, it's to try to disrupt the way that companies operate. If that's how you operate in a corporate environment, you don't want to go to a company that is not going to be a fit for, right? You would rather scare them away early on than spend hours and days interviewing and even potentially getting the job only to be totally miserable once you get there. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. It's okay to ask hard questions. It's okay to scare away employers in certain cases. I know this market is different, so grain of salt with that, but I would say you should do that. You also want to make sure the questions that you're asking are things that are not like immediately available on their career page, not things that you could Google really easily, because that shows you just haven't done your research. You'll have an opportunity, of course, to look the company up in a lot of different places: Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Blind, Reddit, lots of options. And you can use those as a basis to ask questions, especially if it's highlighted something that you're worried about. Hey, I saw on Glassdoor that people mentioned this. Can you talk to me about what that looks like? And then finally, in your questions for a recruiter, you maybe want to close out the conversation, which is to say, hey, is there anything in my background that you're concerned about or that I can address right now that, you think that I'm missing something? Can you tell me what that is so that I can give you more insight or something along those lines? You can ask about next steps. You can ask when you'll hear back. Sometimes you'll get an answer in the moment and they'll say, hey, the next step is you're going to talk to the hiring manager. I'm going to start working on setting that up. They may not be able to give you an answer in the moment, so be prepared either way. But making sure you sort of close things out and know when to expect sort of what's next is going to be important for you. It also shows the recruiter that you can sort of bring the conversation to a close. So lots to do in questions. So I have a bunch of sample questions, and sounds like this deck is going to go out to everyone after. So I'm not going to spend much time here because first of all, you can think of your own questions. These are just some, but what I would tell you to make sure your questions do is also, clue you into some of the things that the company cares about, so that in subsequent conversations, you have more context about the role, about how it fits in, about the challenges of the role. And then you can apply those to the next set of stories you're going to tell to the next people in the process. So some of these questions are good for just contextualizing why the role even exists in the first place, which will help set you up well for subsequent conversations. And make sure you're taking notes, because interviews start to meld together after a while. So make sure you have notes on who you talked to, what you talked about, the answers that they gave, so you don't have to ask the same question multiple times unless you intend to. Sometimes you want to see, do I get the same answer if I ask the same question of 5 different people? So that's okay, but you want to make sure you're not forgetting things that people have shared with you through the process. All right, so additional interviews, the same fundamentals apply. So we've talked a lot about like what the process is going to look like for the recruiter screen. It is a very similar looking, feeling interview with the hiring manager, with someone who's on the interview panel, with an executive final interview. The benefit that you have now is that you have the recruiter to help you prepare. You don't have the recruiter to help you prep for the initial call, but the recruiter is a resource for you for all of those other conversations. So they can tell you, the hiring manager really likes when people answer questions this way, or the hiring manager is a little bit hard to get used to, at first, or sometimes it's hard to get conversational with the hiring manager. That's totally normal. So they are a resource for you at this point, which is great. Again, researching your interviewers. This is something you should do for yourself so you feel comfortable. But it also is going to let you cater the answers that you give to the folks on the other side. So if you can see that someone is a product manager, you're probably not going to talk to them about marketing or recruiting, right? As part of your experience. You're going to concentrate, cater your answers to the person that you're actually speaking to. Practice is big too. I'm sure you've heard this before, but practicing your pitch in the mirror, practicing, giving answers to things that you think you're going to be asked, so that you can start to build a little bit of fluency in your own story. And then again, you're going to ask more questions. In every conversation, you should be asking questions so you can get more perspective on the company culture, on the role, how it fits in, how the teams operate together and collaborate together. You should never run out of questions. So always have questions ready, because this is just going to help you to evaluate, is this the right role for me? Is this the right company for me? Is this a team that I want to join? All of those are important to you in sort of the long run. Again, I know that this market is tough. And so you may, take a role that you wouldn't otherwise take, but you still want to know going in what some of these challenges are going to be. All right. So in the subsequent interviews, you do need to adapt your story. You can't tell the same story over and over again. You shouldn't give the same examples over and over again, if you can avoid it, of course. You told your story to the recruiter. You did that based on the job description and the skills. You are going in to meet with the hiring manager or someone that's actually on this team, and you want to be able to go a level deeper with your story, so that it speaks to the context that you have gained from your conversations thus far. So deeper may mean it's going to go functionally deeper. So you're going to get really in the weeds about what this role is about and what your skills are. So for me, that would be like, what do I do for candidate outreach? What do my funnel metrics look like? It's going to go really, really deep with this next person that I'm meeting. Oftentimes, if you are a technical person, this is where a technical interview is going to jump in, and you're going to, write some code perhaps. So it's, what this is designed to do is to validate what the recruiter thinks they heard in that first conversation. The recruiter is very much a generalist. They are not a specialist in any of the roles that they recruit for. So the next conversation is going to validate that the recruiter heard the right things, that you do have the experience to back up what the recruiter says that, they think you have and think And, to the best of your ability, you want to bring in new examples that will help you stand out. So you don't want the recruiter and hiring manager to meet up and say like, hey, I'm worried about X, and then both to say, oh, well, I had this experience where they talked about this, and have it be the exact same one. To the best of your ability, diversify, talk about different experiences, different companies, different situations, projects, team collaborations, all of that. But also when you're thinking about adapting your story for the hiring manager or subsequent interviews, you want to be able to think about, well, what problem is this role trying to solve? So you may know that this is a marketing role or an engineering role coming in, but most likely they're hiring you because there's a specific need. There's a specific problem. There is a specific thing that isn't working correctly or needs to be scaled. So now that you have that piece of information from the recruiter or whoever you've spoken to, you want to build that into your story, how you've done that in the past, how you've scaled an organization, how you've helped fix a bug that was, a really terrible bug that hurt the customer in a lot of ways. So all of the things that you learn through the process that you're taking notes on, hopefully, will then allow you to tweak your story a little bit, go deeper on the things that matter, and hopefully start to build a picture for the hiring team, hiring manager, what it would look like for you to come work for them. What are you bringing to the team? What sorts of problem solving techniques do you have? How have you seen this happen in the past? What are the things that you think are going to really bring the team, the company, the product to the next level? All of that you can build in as you gain more and more knowledge through the conversations that you have. So with that, I will end. And I know I'm so close on time, so we probably don't have a ton of time for questions, but both of these are places you can find me. My work email address, that's where you can find me on LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to help anyone that is on this call figure out your story, figure out how to answer questions, do mock interviews, do the salary conversation again. But if there are questions in the 2 minutes we have left, we can definitely cover them.
Alex, I just want to direct your attention. There was a question asked a little bit earlier about your thoughts on if folks should mention that they're looking for a new job due to a layoff.
Yeah, I think that's completely fine. I mean, I think it's always been fine, but particularly now, there are so many people that have been laid off, and layoffs no longer mean like you did something wrong. That used to be like the assumption. And now it's just like the company downsized. If you have context on why the company downsized or how much the company downsized, that can sometimes help, because like if it's a 50% workforce reduction, that means something different sometimes to hiring teams. And these are all biases for what it's worth. I know it doesn't actually mean anything. 50% is 50%, but if it's a 2% reduction and you're part of it, they may assume certain things about you, versus if it's a 50% or a 75% reduction, they may make different assumptions. So again, sort of understand that humans are humans, we're all biased, but layoffs is something that is very normal right now, unfortunately. And it's not something you should shy away from, but if you can bring context to it, that would be helpful. And then Carolyn, I saw your question. Super quickly, I would say you, to the best of your ability, explain why those short stints happened, and call them out, right? You can call it out yourself and say, hey, you probably noticed that this happened, in my experience. Here's the story behind that. And it's just another story you're going to be able to tell and say, in a lot of cases, just wasn't a good fit. And so, whatever the case is, but start to build the story so you have a good answer. And, talking about, I really would like to be somewhere long term. I really am interested in staying and growing with the company. That's what I'm looking for. Just highlighting that to the best of your ability is what I would suggest. But I know we're right at time, so I'm more than happy to talk more. Like I said, with anyone, if you have questions, I know I had to go through that super, super fast, but I wanted to cover as much as possible. If I can help, please find me.